Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 844 of People Behind the Science. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and today I'm excited to be rebroadcasting our interview with our guest, Dr. Sonia Contera. Listeners, Sonia is a physicist who's interested in biology and the mechanics of biology across different space and time scales. She develops experiments and techniques to understand the physics that allow biological systems to build nanoscale molecules into cells, organs, tissues, and organisms. Her research spans projects from treating tumors to investigating the physics of plant growth. And in this episode, Sonia shares some great stories about her life and science. So I hope you enjoy this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the People Behind the Science podcast. Today, I am thrilled to be speaking with our guest scientist, Dr. Sonia Contera. So, Sonia, welcome to our show today. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Looking forward to this program.
Well, we are so excited to have you with us today and to learn more about you and your work. But before we jump into our interview questions, let me start first by telling our listeners a little bit about your background. So listeners, Sonia is a research fellow of Green Templeton College and an associate professor of biological physics at the University of Oxford Department of Physics. She is also an author of the recently released book, Nano Comes to Life. Sonia received her bachelor's degree in physics from the Autonomous University of Madrid. She attended graduate school at Beijing Languages and Culture University, and she subsequently worked as a researcher at the Czech Academy of Sciences. Sonia was then awarded a Japanese Government Monbushō scholarship to attend Osaka University, where she received her PhD in applied physics. Next, Sonia was awarded an EU fellowship to Japan at the Institute of Scientific and Industrial Research, SANKEN, at Osaka University. Prior to coming to Oxford in 2003, Sonia served as a research assistant professor at the Interdisciplinary Nanoscience Centre at the University of Aarhus in Denmark. In 2008, Sonia founded the Oxford Martin Institute of Nanoscience for Medicine at the Oxford Martin School. And in our interview today, Sonia, we're excited to learn more about you and your scientific accomplishments, but also more about you as a person. So can you start by telling me and our listeners what you like to do when you're not doing science?
Well, I like doing nothing. Actually, I love doing idle, which doesn't happen very often. So I'm never lucky enough to do that. But I love spending time with people I love, talking to people, cycling, walking. I also a bit of an obsessive consumer of art, especially sculpture, but all forms of art. Like in my scientific life, I am obsessed by the human interest in shape and how shape connects us with life. So I do look at a lot of art, and I also love learning languages. I love ancient languages. These days, I'm learning Arabic. I always wanted to study a Semitic language, and I'm enjoying learning Arabic.
Oh, very cool. And I understand you have studied all over the world. Can you tell our listeners what languages are you fluent in?
Oh, yes. I'm usually quite shy, so I won't tell them all. I speak a few European languages. I love Slavic languages. I learned Russian and Czech when I was young. I also learned Chinese. I spent some time in China learning Chinese. I was quite interested in grammar and how the human brain produces a structure. And then I did my PhD in Japan, so I learned Japanese. Then I spent some time in Denmark, so I learned Danish, some Spanish, and I also speak English.
Well, this is phenomenal. I'm quite impressed as someone who has tried to learn several languages and failed miserably. So,
yeah, I get quite carried away by learning languages. I love it. It makes me very happy.
Well, that is amazing, Sonia. It's great to hear about some of these passions in your life outside of science, but I'd love to talk about your work as well. So for listeners who might not be very familiar with this kind of interface of biology and physics and nanotechnology, how do you describe your work to them?
I work as a physicist, and it's very central to my life. physicists try to understand how the rules that form and sort of govern whatever that is, the whole universe, manifest themselves in places, and how the magic works, that we are able to do mathematics and understand and even predict how nature works. So I used to work as a more traditional physicist in condensed matter physics. And when I was at university, I started to be interested in nanotechnology. I saw the first images from scanning tunneling microscopes that were being produced in the late 1980s when I was starting at university. And I was captured. I always talk about an image I saw where Don Eigler managed to manipulate atoms one by one. And I thought I wanted to be part of that. And then after joining this field of scanning probe microscopy and learning more about matter at the nanoscale, I had to move to biology because the most clever nanomachines in nature are our proteins, our molecules. And I had to start using the tools of nanotech to understand how nature produced them. And as a physicist, you always ask the question, not only how, but what is about the nanoscale that gives rise to life? So that's sort of the motivation. But I also work in very practical projects. So these days I work in mechanics in biology, so trying to understand the engineering aspects of life, how life uses energy across the scales from the nanoscale to cells to whole tissues. And I'm really lucky to have found wonderful collaborators, and I'm using my skills to try to improve our understanding, hopefully the treatment of, for example, pancreatic tumors or heart arrhythmias, and maybe not related. I also work in the physics of plant growth. I'm interested in how plants use energy to create their shapes, how to measure that and how to model it. So I have an interest in biology and mechanics in biology across scales, and I develop experiments, techniques that can be used to understand them, and collaborate with the engineers and biologists, computer scientists and medics to solve problems where my expertise is useful.
Certainly. And Sonia, you are working on a wide variety of cool projects, and I look forward to chatting more about them as we go through our conversation today. But I'd love to touch on what motivates you as a scientist and as a person. I think for me, it's helpful to collect little quotes and sayings and things I can use in my daily life to keep me going. So do you have particular favorites or quotes that really resonate with you?
I don't use quotes so much, but as I told you before, I used to be a student of Chinese language and culture, and I was thinking about quotes and something came to my head that somehow permeates a lot of my philosophy when I do science, which is come from the Tao Te Ching, from Lao Tzu. So very ancient Chinese philosophy. And there's a quote there in English, nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. Within nature, intrinsic with it, is this capacity of creating wonders. And they're not rational in the way we are rational. They just happen and everything is accomplished. And I think in a way that permeates my work. I want to feel within myself how nature creates its wonders, I suppose.
Absolutely. And maybe help slow you down a little bit when you're feeling frantic and a crazy day at work, right?
Yes.
Well, wonderful quote to share with me and our listeners. And I'd love to touch next on some of the people, Sonia, who may have had a big impact on you. Are there any particular role models or mentors or just inspirational figures that you've looked up to in your career?
I don't think I have role models, maybe because I'm a working class woman and there's not many around. I have a lot of anti-role models, people I really don't want to be like, scientists. The ones with the super egos that they just think about their personal metrics and impact factors to advance their careers. That doesn't bring any meaning to my life or my work. I do have a figure that was important in my life. I did my PhD in Japan, in Osaka University, and my PhD supervisor, Hiroshi Iwasaki, it is a figure that has influenced me a lot. I remember he wouldn't talk to you much, but his kindness, sort of quiet kindness and support and understanding at the same time, knowing that he was always there. I thought it was great to experience working with someone like that. And I tried to be a bit like him as a supervisor.
Definitely. I love that, supportive, but not with the micromanaging. I think that's important for...
Yeah, no, it was great.
Well, it sounds like you had some great mentors to lead you through some of the important stages of your careers. And Sonia, we touched on some of your first experiences with the scanning tunneling microscopy and just how that got you excited about the field. But can we rewind back even farther? And can you tell me and our listeners what first turned your eye towards science or physics in general?
Well, I grew up in the Canary Islands in an island called Fuerteventura. That was very remote at the time. It was the 1970s in Spain, and that was just the end of a dictatorship, and the island had been abandoned for a long time. So I didn't have a very strong schooling. We had a lot of holidays and not very good teachers. So I spent a lot of time just roaming wild in beaches or volcanoes. So I think that is what made me a scientist, my connection with nature. I also love thinking about the whole. And when afterwards I moved to Madrid and I did go to a regular, normal secondary school, and I had a great physics teacher. And we started talking about the forces that drive, the things that usually take us to physics is planets and orbits, because this sense of the whole and that we are part of the universe, I loved it. And also my love of maths. I love doing maths. So I think that was a natural path towards a physicist career, I think.
Absolutely. And we mentioned in our introduction, you received your bachelor's degree in physics from the Autonomous University of Madrid. Can you talk about your experiences there?
Yeah, that wasn't great. I loved physics, but when I arrived to university, I didn't engage very much with the way it was being taught. And also there started the class issues as well. So suddenly you arrived to university and most of the students were middle class and their parents were engineers or scientists. And I didn't belong to that world and I felt I didn't fit. I think that's why I started to study languages at the same time. I studied Russian, Chinese, just to be able to go through the physics degree. I love physics, but didn't like that. So I thought I would quit science after my degree. I came back after a few years and that was great, but did struggle.
So what helped you make it through college? You mentioned studying languages on the side as well was beneficial. Were there other things that really helped you get through this period where you really weren't feeling like you fit in with your peers?
I suppose the values of hard work of my family, that you would finish where you had started, and also a genuine love for physics makes me happy.
Well, afterwards, you had quite an interesting path and you were able to, as we mentioned, study in a lot of different countries. Can you talk about some of these key moments that really helped you get from that undergraduate graduate to where you are today?
I have an unusual career path, and I never thought I would make it to be an Oxford professor. I never even thought or tried to do that thing. Again, that's my working class background. So I decided to do things I was interested in and I will find my own path. I was originally interested in modeling linguistics with maths, what it was then called computational linguistics, and now is part of machine learning. I was lucky I got a scholarship from the Chinese government and I went to China in 1993, which was a fascinating time to be in China and in Beijing especially. So that changed my life. I totally sort of broke my ideas of what I thought I was or everything was, being transplanted to a very different culture when you're very young and eager to learn. So that was very transformative. I loved being in China, learning Chinese and traveling through China. And it was in China where I started to realize I really wanted to be a scientist and that was the path I wanted to take. So I eventually ended up in Japan. I again managed to get a very good scholarship. There was a scholarship of the Japanese government that was really well paid. I think at the time was the best paid scholarship in the world, something like that. So that was good for me. I loved it. And I was interested in Japan first for being in a place that was doing science from a different culture, yet was still doing science at a very high level, as opposed to Western science. And also because coming from Spain, I was interested in a country that had managed to go so quickly from an almost medieval economy to second economy of the world at the time through the use of technology. I was interested in the way technology played a role in Japanese society, and I was lucky I could do that. I really thought it was great. I spent there 6 years. After my PhD, I stayed on. I got a fellowship and stayed a bit longer. But eventually in Japan, a foreigner and especially a foreign woman has no chance to have a career or even to have a family or anything like that. So I decided to come back to Europe. I took a post in Denmark, and while I was just arriving in Denmark less than a year, I was sort of headhunted from Oxford. I wasn't sure I was going to fit here again, where my class issues, I thought maybe I don't fit in Oxford, but I thought to give me a last chance. Either I make it in Oxford or I quit science. And I loved it here. Oxford gave me, in a way, this place I needed to develop, and I stayed 16 years ago. I've been here so long.
Absolutely. And can you talk about your experiences? You actually founded the Oxford Martin Institute of Nanoscience for Medicine there. So what was that like, kind of building that from the ground up?
That was great. So when I got my first academic post, a little bit afterwards, I remember I was pregnant of my first child. James Martin gave one of the biggest, I think it still is the biggest donation, I'm not sure, that has ever been given to Oxford to create the Oxford Martin School. That would be like a kind of hub for multidisciplinary research to tackle problems of the 21st century. So there was a call within the university to present projects for creating institutes associated with the Oxford Martin School. So I put together a team of physicists, biologists, and biochemists to start working on some problems at the interface between nanotechnology and biology that would be useful for medical application. It was very interesting, especially not only for the science we could do, but also because being in the Martin School allowed me, again, this thing in Oxford that if you have knowledge or talent, you will find a way to use it, right? So because of my experiences living in many places and with interest in other fields, I had an urge to become more active, engaging with the public or with institutions. So the Oxford Martin School allowed me to start giving public lectures about science, or that would help me to shape the way and tell people the way I think science have developed so far, or why we're doing the research we're doing, why now physics in biology, why nanotech in biology. I started working in some project with the World Economic Forum, and I wanted to learn more about how to make our science productive. And we all know that we are very good in the lab, but when we try to translate the research we do in the lab to the real world, it's very hard. So that was great. I could start engaging with the problems trying to do from another angle.
Absolutely. And I know your work in the lab kind of spans the range of basic to applied work or translational work. So is there a particular project you're working on today, Sonia, that you are just so excited about and you want to tell me and our listeners more about?
Well, quite a few. So some time ago, a really wonderful scientist and surgeon came to talk to me because he was interested in understanding the mechanics of pancreatic tumors. Alex Gordon-Wicks, which is rather wonderful, very open to new things. So with a wonderful student in my lab, Casey Adam, who is from Colorado, actually, we started poking these tumors and trying to understand why the tumors don't allow drugs to diffuse. And our results are rather wonderful. It's like the cells inside the tumor somehow know how to shape the tumor, that it has a specific time response to things. So the cells are controlling timings of things inside the tumor, and we think we can use this to maybe facilitate the diffusion of chemotherapy drugs into tumors, because one of the main problems you have in pancreatic tumors is that even if you put a lot of drugs, they don't diffuse into the tumor, they don't go inside. So it doesn't matter how good your drugs are, they don't reach the cancer cells. So this is super exciting that we can use physics, quite basic physics, polymer physics, to understand tumors and perhaps to produce new treatments. And more on the applied side, we're creating some new technology for cryopreservation of cells. And we're looking at spinning out a company in the coming years, maybe 1-2 years. And that's also very exciting. Learn how to bring your research into startup, into something happening in the real world. That's also quite fun.
Oh, that is so cool. So Sonia, do you think you will have a hand in the company going forward, or are you going to stick with the academic work?
I think initially I will have to. Mm-hmm. I would like to leave it alone once it's going, because the ideas have been generated mainly by myself. I think in order to get venture capital and to drive the applications and the opportunities, I will have to be involved. It's also a very complex interface, the startups with the scientists, because although it's often said that it's better that you leave your CEO to run your company, many of my colleagues also find that because the CEOs don't have any real interest in the company, you have to get involved because you were motivated in the first place to put all your work to do it. So I think it's a complicated enterprise, but I think eventually I will try to go that way because I want to explore it, see what I can do, if it's useful, and definitely get my students or postdocs that are interested to learn about how to create a startup.
Well, thank you so much for sharing some of these really exciting projects from your research group. And we touched on some of the challenges with scientific startups. And I think there are so many different kinds of challenges that you can encounter in science, whether it's kind of the small everyday challenges or the major failures you experience at different points in your career. So, Sonia, do you have a story of failure that you can tell me and our listeners about, or just a difficult time that you went through? And tell us how you got through it to become a successful scientist.
I have lots of those. I think one of my worst crises was after my first maternity leave, I came back to work and there was a lot of social problems in the lab and in the structure where I was working at the time. And some senior scientists had gone a little bit violent against other people. And it was very difficult. At some point, I didn't even have access to my own equipment to work.
Oh, wow.
These are processes that happens in science sometimes. It's a social activity and complicated things can happen. So it forces you to rethink what was the meaning of what I was trying to do. Do I really just work to get papers or I want to get more meaning out of this? So these moments of crisis actually force you to find meaning in the crisis itself. Sometimes crises are needed for progress and sometimes things need to get destroyed in order for new things to be born. So I reshaped myself. I decided I would shift fields. I would go to this thing I was interested in of mechanics in biology and shape in biology and how biology creates shape. So I embraced the crisis. I suffered through it. And through the complexity of the crisis, I sort of tried to find a way out. And emotionally, what got me through was to do a lot of public talking, a lot of engaging with the public, talking a lot about what I wanted to do and also finding new collaborators. So I went to find collaborators in other departments and create a totally new research that would come out of the crisis. And then you turn your crisis into a creative force and then you go through.
Absolutely. Well, I think connecting with others is such a great way to remind you of the excitement in your work and why you're doing it.
Yeah. One of the things people don't realize when we talk about science is that the public is very eager to know what we're doing in the lab and that you learn a lot explaining it. You get new ideas for research. It gives meaning to what you're doing and it gives you an enormous energy. Actually, many women in science like to do communication because it gives meaning to our job.
Absolutely. And helps inspire that next generation of scientists coming down the pipeline as well. I think it's so important. But I'm so glad to hear you made it through this difficult time and reshaped yourself as a scientist and reshaped your research interests, because I think that's a really productive way to deal with what sounds like a really difficult situation in your case.
Yes, that's the way you have to deal with your crisis, trying to build things, to create new things, I think. If you can, I don't know, if the crisis is too hard, maybe you can't. But if you have a space, you should create new things.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for sharing how you work through this difficult time. But Sonia, we'd love to chat about some of your successes as well. So do you have a favorite success story, whether it was just a small win that was particularly meaningful or one of these huge wins that made a big change in your career that you want to tell us about?
I think the successes that make me the happiest are the ones that have to do with my students or postdocs. Doing a PhD is very hard because you're trying not only to be good at science, but trying to understand why and how are you good at. You're trying to find yourself through your research can be really hard for a young person. You have to confront yourself with a lot of insecurities in a very competitive world. Science is very competitive. So when I manage to help a student to go through their low points and we end up solving a problem that is very difficult, I get very happy. So, for example, one of the students in the lab right now, Alba Piacenti, she was struggling for a long time to create a rather difficult technique based on atomic force microscopy that would allow us, for example, to work on these pancreatic tumors, or actually we're interested in applying it to heart arrhythmias, trying to understand how the heart cells start to not beat at the same time. And the technique was rather hard and she struggled for a long time. And helping her to find a way through it, not just through my help, but building her resilience and her skills to go through it and find collaborations has made me very happy recently. And I think it's going to be a great technique that will have a lot of applications beyond biology, also material science.
Well, congratulations, Sonia, to you and your student Elba for making it through. It sounds like a difficult situation there and having a happy ending there, because I think that persistence maybe doesn't come naturally to students at first.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. So this is the journey of the PhD, right?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing one of these success stories. And we mentioned at the beginning of our show today that you are, in addition to your faculty position, you're also an author. So I'd love to chat for a minute or two about your upcoming book here. So can you tell me and our listeners about A Nano Comes to Life and what it's about?
So I've been writing for a long time because I have 2 little children, and as you can see, I do a lot of things, but it's been in my head for a long time. So when Ingrid Nerlich from Princeton University Press contacted me to see if I was interested in writing a book, I was thinking probably I should say no, but I'm going to have to say yes, because there's a lot of things I wanted to know more about. So basically, the book is about how the emergence of nanotechnology brings the tools to study biology, and that changes. So that brought a lot of physicists like me to study biology and look at biology in a different way that biochemists or more traditionally trained biologists usually do. And this has happened for the last 40 years, 30 years. And this not only because of nanotechnologies, many other physicists or engineers, applied mathematicians, all the sciences are converging into biology at the moment. We're trying to learn from biology complexity, how to clear the roadblocks we have in technology. For example, even machine learning, artificial intelligence is getting inspiration from the structure of the neurons in the brain. Material scientists are trying to learn how biology builds up from the nanoscale up to build the materials of the future. So I was interested in exploring this convergence, these applications in medicine, but also a little bit more philosophically to think about what it means that the sciences are converging into biology for the future of humanity. One of the things I realized that is different is that because we study biology from the point of view of physics, what we are doing is trying to put biology in the widest possible context, which is the rules that govern the cosmos. And that is a radical departure to which biology has been in much of the 20th century, which was explained by genes and molecules sort of separated from nature. Everything we need to know about a cell is written in its genes, which is not true. Genes get expressed in very complex ways when the cell or bacterium or whatever cell of our body is in total entanglement with the environment. We are not separated from the environment. We evolved, and our history of evolution on Earth brings all that history in each of us from the rules that govern the universe through a massive entanglement, with total entanglement with our environment. That's the only reason we could create replicating molecules in the first place. So I think this idea that we emerge from nature and we are totally connected with nature, not separated from nature. We cannot actually tinker with our genes, one gene, and change who we are. Hundreds of genes are always involved in everything we do. It changes a lot the way we think about life. And I think this is important to think of in the context of the climate crisis we have right now. We depend and emerge from the environment. We cannot dominate the environment forever because we're entangled with it. So I wanted to explore from the basic physics of life, from the basic biology, the philosophical implications and the possibilities for cultural change that it brings for preserving human life on Earth. So most of the book is about the science, but I also wanted to explore a little bit what are the sort of philosophical consequences of the science, which is something scientists usually we don't do. We don't have time to do. And I think it's also important that a woman does this thinking. I have different background to most of my colleagues, and I think I can bring different perspectives to the debate. A lot of the debate about technology is not actually done by technologists. A lot of the writing is done by philosophers or historians that don't really understand the science, and they don't understand the politics within the science. So exploring the origin of the ideas and why we arrive where we are and what are the possibilities forward is a bit of the mission of the book.
Absolutely. And you bring up a lot of these cool nanotech opportunities and applications kind of currently and for the future. And I think the conversation around the philosophy and the ethics is really important going forward for those types of areas.
Absolutely. But it's also part of the book, and it's important for the book to talk about the science. Most part of the book is about the physics of life that we are doing in the labs, the convergence of nanotechnology with biology, the emergence of nanotechnology done with DNA or proteins and how this is applied for drug delivery of the treatment of cancer or for creating artificial tissues in the lab that could be used in the future, maybe for transplantation or for drug discovery without the use of animals in animal testing. So I think it's important to convey the science, how we do the science, and also to reflect on the consequences of the science we're doing.
Certainly. Well, Sonia, we will definitely add your book to our reading list on our website. Are there any other books you'd like to recommend for our listeners, whether they are related to science or not?
Well, I've read recently 2 books that I really loved reading. So the first one is Einstein's War by Matthew Stanley. It is about science, although usually I don't read about science. But I think after writing my book, I am more into reading other authors. This book is about how Eddington, who was a British astronomer, a Quaker, took upon himself the task to make relativity important and famous, not only because of the science, but because he believed in peace. After the First World War, most American and British and French scientists were thinking that Germans were not able to produce good science. So Einstein had been writing pacifist articles in the German press. And Eddington decided to know more about his science and eventually prove that the predictions of relativity were correct. He did the experiments that measured the bending of light with the sun, and also create the PR campaign to make relativity big. So collaboration after the war between scientists in different countries will become possible. And I think it's a wonderful story of how minorities and politics and physics and everything else is intertwined. And in this case, for a positive cause, which is great. It gave me a lot of hope, that book. And the other book is Superior by Angela Saini. Actually, it's quite, in a way, complementary to my own book. So she explores the science or bad science or lack of science about race, how colonialist science of the 19th and 20th century put genes and statistics at the service of eugenics, and how biology and science was used to support differences between the races that could not actually be measured, and they were not because they don't exist. I really love reading the political context in which a lot of biology has happened. And again, it reinforces the thesis of my book. Maybe that's why I like it. That it's very important to study biology within the context of physics, because it's the context of the whole universe. Humans are not separated from nature. And this is a wonderful book of exploring the history of many of the most horrible ideas that run within biology before and after the Second World War.
Certainly. Well, Sonia, great recommendations. We will add this to our reading list for our listeners as well if they are looking for their next great book to read. And we touched on throughout our conversation some of the phenomenal opportunities you've had to study and train abroad. And I think this is one of the great opportunities that scientists do have as part of their career, whether it's traveling for conferences, working with colleagues and collaborators, or to study abroad. So do you have a favorite place that your science has taken you that you want to tell us about today?
Oof, my science has taken me to a lot of places.
Mm-hmm.
You have the opportunity of doing wonderful things. Like a few years ago, I was invited to teach a course on nanotechnology for medicine in Chengdu University in China. And going to Sichuan, to Chengdu, was very appealing to me. And I had a wonderful time meeting the students, and I came back very hopeful for the future of humanity. In a way, the wonderful quality of the Chinese students I had in Chengdu, that was absolutely great. In my life, doing experiments also abroad for short periods is quite fun. I always remember in the early 2000s, I used to travel a lot to Kanazawa University in Japan. And there, the group of Toshio Ando was developing the first high-speed AFMs that would allow them and us to visualize the movement of proteins in real time in liquid, like the rotations of proteins or the walking or the opening and closing of a single protein in real time. And we used to go there like for weeks or months with one of my PhD students, Kislon Wojciechowski, to do experiments for a very long time, sort of working day and night. And the university was in a mountain in Kanazawa with a lot of signs to be aware of the presence of bears. And
oh, no.
Yeah. It was quite a place. Careful with the bears when you go out. So we had a wonderful time. And also when you succeed after a lot of months of work, is great time.
Well, it sounds amazing. And Sonia, it sounds like you've had so many great opportunities to travel to meet people from all over the world. And you've touched throughout our conversation on just some of these great people you've met and worked with, whether it's your students, your collaborators. And I think this is another great aspect of life as a scientist. And I think people maybe take for granted that the stereotypes that they see in the media are not always true about scientists. So I've met so many scientists who are quirky, funny, have many interests and hobbies outside of the lab. And I think fun and funny things happen when scientists get together that go contrary again to these stereotypes. So do you have any stories, Sonia, of funny traditions you experienced or just great memories that you've shared with colleagues that can really highlight this human side of science?
There's a lot of these ones, especially because experimental science, we're together in small spaces, if you want, for a long time. And sometimes we are forced to eat together, have dinner together. And scientists usually are fun. We get to speak to really crazy conversations. In Japan, used to be fun. Being part of a Japanese lab is good because you used to live in the lab. It's this Japanese working ethic, so you're always there. So we used to cook dinner and then go out and then come back to the lab. We would go to the cinema together or bowling and then come back to the lab. It was this constant living like a family, sort of fun and life, everything intertwined and trying to do experiments. It was really crazy. I have never experienced anything like that anywhere else, this constant being part of your working group. But it was fun. We felt like part of a family.
Did you ever get overwhelmed by the work schedule or the togetherness?
No. I think that accompanies me forever. The thing I love more is to stay late in the lab, which I cannot do very often anymore. But the feeling of going for dinner and coming back to the lab until 2 a.m. I remember it was very cozy. Nowhere else is cozy, but in Japan it was, maybe because my supervisor was very nice. And we had a very good kitchen in the lab. So we always had a lot of cakes and a lot of teas, and it was like really being cozy. It was a mad thing.
Well, it sounds amazing. Do you have any current traditions in your lab today, Sonia, that you can tell us about?
No, not at all.
No?
I'm very anarchic and I let my students do whatever they like and they have very free lives. And we don't do traditions. I let things happen by themselves. So we don't do this. No.
I like it. You have the tradition of a hands-off leadership style, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, totally. I'm here when they need me, but otherwise you can do whatever you like.
I think that is a phenomenal structure. I think it encourages creativity because you and the group there are answering some amazing questions in science. And I think oftentimes funding, staff, technology, feasibility, or maybe just time stops you from being able to answer the questions you want to answer, complete the projects you want to do. So if we gave you anything you could dream of today, Sonia, what is the one question you would most want to answer or the one problem you'd most want to solve?
I'm not sure I would like to be without restrictions to start with. I think the struggle for funding and stuff and everything else actually help you to shape better the questions. And I don't think I would like to be stress-free doing my science because I think I'm more creative when I have restrictions. But apart from that, I'm very interested in how cells synchronize with each other through vibrations. An obvious example is in the heart, but they do it in other places. I'm very interested in how nature and biology creates timing, and that relationship of time with shape and growth, I find it fascinating. So they're very profound questions about the origin of life on Earth, and I would love to explore it in heart synchronization. I'm currently trying to find sources of funding to work towards that goal.
Perfect. So is funding the main restriction for you? Or are there any kind of technology hurdles?
Oh, yeah, big time. The UK is not the best place in the world to find funding. There's no funding anywhere these days for science, apart from maybe Israel or South Korea. But yeah, funding is a big problem, as everybody knows, which forces you to be creative again. Not the best science is the work is done by the most wealthy places. Again, the UK doesn't put so much money into science, and yet they have a lot of Nobel Prizes. And I think one of the reasons is because the intellectual environment they create in their universities is very strong. So it's not only about money. Money matters, of course, but it's about finding the right questions with the money you have.
Certainly. Well, Sonia, I know you're not alone in your struggles to find funding with the research that you're doing. So at least that perhaps is a comfort. But
it is.
But phenomenal questions that you would answer with unlimited resources. And you've shared so many great insights and stories with me and our listeners today. Sonia, is there one last piece of advice you'd like to share with us, or maybe a piece of advice that someone gave you that really helped you that you can pass on to us today?
I'm going to go back to my PhD supervisor, Hiroshi Iwasaki. again, being kind and supportive was so important for his students. And also maybe what I learned from him was how a good supervisor should try to get the best of everybody. Every student has a talent. Some of them have lots of talents and they're great and they're very successful, and others are not. And to try to help them to find their talents and to find a way they can contribute to science. That's the best advice I could give. Also for the students, to try to find yourself in your work. I think the best science you can do is when you find your true self in the work you're doing, which is a very difficult thing to achieve. But yeah, somehow I got that, at least started on that path when I was doing my PhD.
Absolutely. Well, wonderful advice to share with our listeners. Is there any other last piece of advice or a note of inspiration you want to end our conversation on today, Sonia?
As I said before, I think when you find your true self, your talents and what you really are through your work, and especially to find a way for your work to be meaningful outside your own career, but you can be meaningful in many ways, I think is the biggest purpose maybe of science. And I think the most happy moments of my life, or probably most scientists' lives, are when you manage to get in touch with your true self as you come in contact with a scientific problem you're trying to solve, and then something magic unlocks when you finally understand something you've been struggling for a long time through your work. And that happiness compares to nothing, especially if you manage to turn that knowledge into something meaningful. That's why I do science.
I love it. A wonderful note to end on, Sonia. If our listeners want to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, where should they go or how should they get in touch?
You could find my website in the physics department of the University of Oxford, and I'm also on Twitter, so people can find me. There's no other Sonia Contera as far as I know.
Excellent. Well, listeners, definitely check out that website. Follow Sonia on Twitter to get up to date on what her lab's been working on. And Sonia, it's been such a pleasure to have you with us today on the show.
Thank you. That was great. I enjoyed thinking about your questions, so I hope they're useful for someone.
Well, thank you again so much for your insights and stories. And listeners, thank you for joining us as well. We'll see you next time on another episode of People Behind the Science.